Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 7:30 to 8 a.m. session of the 2025 Open Simulator Community Conference. In this session, we are pleased to introduce the presentation using glTF Mesh in OpenSim. Our speaker is Austin. Austin is the avatar Austin Tate, Emeritus Professor of Knowledge-Based Systems at the University of Edinburgh. He has been involved with virtual worlds and VR for over 2 decades and is the coordinator for the Virtual University of Edinburgh VIEW and is frequently involved in early development and testing in Second Life and OpenSim for both viewer and server-side capabilities. Please check out the website found at conference.opensimulator.org for speaker bios, details of the sessions, and the full schedule of events. This session is being live streamed and recorded, so if you have questions or comments during the session, you may send tweets to @OpenSimCC with the hashtag #OSCC25. Welcome, everyone. Let's begin the session.
Thanks, Leah. Hello, everyone. This session is going to cover some aspects and experience with using glTF Mesh. So I'll explain what that is for those of you that don't know. But OpenSim has actually supported glTF Mesh since mid-2025. That's mostly because the viewers have supported it. The server side hasn't really needed to change because we use a common internal mesh format that's used for Collada imports of mesh. So from most people's point of view, even if you're using a viewer that's really quite old now, things just work in OpenSim, which is quite nice. But that's a kind of an intermediate stage. I'll explain some of that as we get into the talk. What I'm trying to do here is provide some of the lessons learned in actually testing out glTF Mesh Import while it was being developed in Second Life, where I was heavily involved in some of the early testing, and in OpenSim, just to make sure that things are still working there. So we'll get into that in a bit of detail, but in chat, I'm just going to post something here. Some of the slides I've created are really more like a checklist. A lot of detail is in them about restrictions or limitations on what can be done with the mesh. In many cases, that's common to the Collada limitations. So it won't surprise those people who are already using mesh in Second Life, what you see on the lists. But I wanted to bring it all together. And that blog post that I've just listed in chat there, I'll remind you at the end of the talk as well about that, it is a source of that information so people could use it as a little reference source that specializes what's happening with glTF mesh in OpenSim. So let's get into the talk. Give it a little bit of history first. Much of this really goes back to Collada Mesh Import and how that was implemented. And there are some limitations of that. But that goes right back more than, 14 years is that? 2011. But glTF PBR, physically based rendering, material support, started to be added to Second Life in 2023. And this was a move that was intended eventually to support more of the emerging standard for glTF mesh. glTF actually is looked after by the Kronos group, who are the ones that did Collada. So it's a common route for these standards for mesh transfer between systems. And glTF is being supported in more and more platforms now. So it's an important development from our point of view in virtual worlds. Around 2024, glTF Mesh Import was under development in Second Life, and there were a range of ways that was done. In some cases, it was using standard libraries just to render meshes in Second Life without really coming back into the core system and being able to be used in a shared way. And simple shared ways of displaying it were under development. So that was all the early experiments. But the Second Life viewer properly supporting glTF mesh upload and its use for resing back in world really came in mid-2025. And that's mesh rather than just the PBR materials elements of the glTF standard. The idea then needed to be transferred over into the third-party viewers that can log into OpenSim, and that happened in mid 2025. So really, Mesh has been available. glTF Mesh uploads for use in OpenSim has been available from mid 2025. Now, the future is that probably Linden Lab is going to try to support more and more of the glTF standards, which are quite extensive, including all sorts of different kind of avatar skeletons and so on. But that's all to come. At the moment, the support is for a subset of glTF mesh that can be translated into the internal format that was used for Collada. There is a workflow, and this is where really I don't want you to try to look at the detail here, because this was intended to try to give some of my own experience for people who are interested in trying to use glTF mesh extensively. But the idea is you obtain or create a 3D model, tidy it up in some sort of 3D modeler to make sure it's going to be suitable for what you want to see, and then export it to glTF, and then skip the blue stuff in the middle, import it into Second Life, including its textures, and then I'll come on to talking about PBR materials. But if you've got PBR materials, you have to load it again to get the materials in. That will change in later viewer updates, but at the moment it's a two-stage process. But if you're not using PBR materials, you're just using all the old material textures that we have in Second Life and OpenSim, then basically that's it and finished. The reality is actually more complicated than that. If you did that with any sort of detailed complex models, then you're going to find problems and hit many of the limitations that Collada Mesh includes. And that's what the blue stuff is about. Because more typically, you've got to then take your initial model and simplify it in ways that allow it to be rendered more quickly in the development platform, in the viewing platform, rather than what you see in the Blender development side. And I won't go through that blue stuff because it is a bit more detailed, but the idea is to use some of these standard transformation tools, and they're around, and I'm going to cover those in a little bit in a minute. So sources of some models, first of all, just to get started with these things. There are a lot of sources of models. NASA, for instance, have an online repository of all sorts of very nice 3D models, many of them now available in glTF, that you can just take and try to use. Often some of those models, if they're complex, will need that simplification step I mentioned. But basically, you can take them and try them out and see if they work. And that's a great source of models. Um, the Kronos Group has a website with a whole series of simple test models which you can also try out. And SketchUp 3D Warehouse has many building style models and other things that people have uploaded, and it's a source of many often free models. Or you can create your own using 3D modelers, including open source modelers such as Blender. So these are the pictures behind me are some of the models I've been using as tests. Many of these were models have been developed over the years by some of our teams or some of the projects or some of the hobby things that we've worked on. Like you can see in the top left there, the 2001 space station. That's a sketch. That's from the SketchUp 3D Warehouse. The ISS model next to it, this International Space Station, came from the NASA site, and so on. Some of those others are science fiction vehicles and other vehicles of interest. Down on the bottom line, in the middle, you can see Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water building, which again is a Sketchfab model. So these are the kind of things we're doing. So let's actually, I'm just going to bring up for you, just so you can see this. Um, this is, I'm just bringing it up onto the stage now, if I can get it up here. Uh, so the model to the right-hand side of the stage is a piston bully, snowcat style vehicle. That's completely glTF uploaded and simply rendered. And that's a kind of an example of one of the things that you could just take from one of these repositories that came from a model repository. And I'm going to now, on the other side of the stage, bring up the 1960s, 1966 Batmobile. Yes, let's get it up on stage. Just moving it down so it's on the ground. Um, So again, that's these are test models I've been using over the years. Some of these models were created by ourselves, some by others, and they kind of give you an idea of, of what's happening. Now I'm using on these standard textures as opposed to the physically based rendering materials. I've done that to make sure that people using older viewers don't see them in a grey colour. But all of these are actually started off with PBR things, which look pretty similar to the way that this appears with gloss, but it can be a lot more realistic and quite nice if you've got the right viewer. Now, I've turned round, and if you look at my back, my avatar back, you'll see you'll see I'm wearing a sword from the Hobbit movies. This is the Orcrist sword. Um, that is actually using PBR materials. So some of you, well, all of you should see something in terms of the colouring of it. But I'm just going to take it out of its. Let's see. I'm going to put one in my hand, and I'm going to remove that. So now I've just left the scabbard on my back, and I'm holding the sword. And these are using PBR materials, but they are glTF mesh uploaded. It gives you another idea of that you can use these things like avatar attachments. Okay, so the current limitations on glTF that I mentioned are important. These all come from the internal mesh format limitations that we're currently using in Second Life and OpenSim. Again, I don't propose to go through these, but they do give you limitations on things such as the minimum size of a part. So if you're making items such as jewelry, where you might have very small links and parts, these sometimes can hit the limitations, the minimum limitation you can have for the mesh parts. And there's a maximum limitation on the mesh. So for things that might be a region scale build, such as that falling water model, or such as the 2001 space station, these things are enormous, and in some cases actually cover larger than a normal OpenSim region. So if you do have to do some thinking about the model that you're importing, if necessary, breaking it into parts that may fit within the limitations that we have available. So there is a difference between Second Life and OpenSim in that respect. Second Life has a maximum size limitation of any one piece of the mesh of 64 meters, whereas for OpenSim we actually have a maximum limitation of 255 256 meters, which means you can have a region scale item such as a build for falling water that fills the entire region as a single model. Now, physics, someone's just asking for, I see, and I've got a note that I want to just give you in text about that. So typically, when you import, you can create the mesh model. You just tick a box and say whether you want to use the lowest of the levels of detail or the highest or whatever, and that works pretty well in most circumstances. But it is problematic if you've got very detailed meshes, especially with very small parts in them. You can find that causes trouble. That's true in Second Life, it's true in OpenSim, it's true of Collada, and it's also true hence in glTF. So what you can do if you have problems is this is my experience, simply say that you want the bounding box physics, which gives you a very crude a cube-like structure around it, which isn't really suitable for things like buildings where you're walking through doors and things of that kind, or like the oil rig model that we have, where you really got to go down individual stairs and things of that kind. If it doesn't import, then the trick is to bring it in with bounding box, which I've found always works with all the glTF meshes I've ever tried, and then make a separate physics model which is much simpler, that matches what you want as the colliding box. And you can sometimes do that just by using prim-based builds in world and attaching it to the model, just making it invisible. Okay. Those tips again are more to do with my checklists. And again, it's better to view the website to see some of those tips. And in particular, it'll mention some of the transformation tools that can be used for simplifying the meshes, which is an important aspect. So I don't propose to go through that in the talk. You can see what's on the screen now in the web page, the blog web page I pointed you at. The, again, this is an indication of the types of tools available for viewing models and for transforming them. Again, I wanted to provide this so that you've got a source of this information following the talk. Now, the glTF that's uploaded can also include rigged mesh avatars, but it's not quite as simple as that because the limitation is that we still have to use the old Second Life skeleton, which has quite a lot of restrictions. So although you can bring in glTF visual appearance avatars, you have to make sure that the skeleton you're using is exactly compatible with the Bento's mesh skeletons we're already using. So I'm going to just put another item on screen here, on the stage here, so you can just see this. Um, the picture is of some of the avatars I've brought in. Some of these avatars have also come from Ready Player Me, which is a way of directly creating glTF avatars. But because the skeleton is not compatible with Second Life, you do have to transfer the skeleton over to a Second Life compatible and OpenSim compatible one. You can do that using tools such as the Avastar tools, Bento Body, or the open source versions of those type of tools that are available. Let me just put this object up. So this is a appearing to my, I'm bringing it up now. So this is one of the drones from, if I bring it a bit forward, this is one of the drone robots from the Silent Running movie. Created, it's originally an open source Sketchfab model that Fred Bakusin did some improvement on, and he did some of the rigging of this. So this is actually a rigged. Let me get it. It's floating in space here for me. Hopefully that's good enough that you can see it. Yeah. Um, and that avatar can also be worn and simply work, but it's got the Second Life skeleton in it. At the moment, you can't bring animated glTF animated items in. That was something that used to work when we were doing rather more of the coverage of glTF in Second Life, but at the moment that isn't a feature that's supported. Right, let me just go on now. And so we're finishing up the talk, but I want to remind you that if you go to, I'm going to put the reminder of the, there we go. So if you go to that web page, you'll get a lot of these lists and items and all the full references and links in the citations at the end to the different tools I've been mentioning and things that are there. So hope that's useful, and I hope some of you can use glTF meshes in OpenSim in future.
Thank you for such a great talk. We are so appreciative for your work. Thank you, AI Austin. Excuse me, that's I Austin, for an informative and interesting presentation. As a reminder to our audience, you will want to check out the conference.opensimulator.org to see what is coming up on the conference schedule. You won't want to miss our next session, which will begin at 8 a.m. in this keynote region, and it's entitled WordPress Interface for Open Simulator. Now, also, we encourage you to visit the OSCC 25 Poster Expo in the OSCC Expo 3 region to find accompanying information on the presentations and explore the hypergrid resources in OSCC Expo 2 region, along with the sponsor and crowdfunder booths located throughout all of the OSCC Expo regions. Thank you again to AI Austin and to the audience.